Start with Ms. Gittleman. With the new consumer financial protections the committee's discussing, to products the committee is discussing today, it's important at the outset to establish what type of financial products that they are. So my question for you, Ms. Gittleman, first question, are buy now, pay later, earned wage access, and other types of products that use the TIP model you discussed, are they a form of credit that falls within the purview of existing consumer protections?
Yes, thank you for the question. Each of the products discussed today are, in fact, credit and should be treated as such by both consumers and regulators alike.
Mr. Seligman, are TRAPS, the acronym TRAPS, which leave the consumer in debt for their employment training, is that considered credit?
Yes, absolutely, and they should be covered by consumer protections. I will say that some employers may argue that the underlying training is not for the benefit of the employee and the personal benefit of the employee, and therefore is for the benefit of the employer. But in those cases, again, the TRAP is a violation of minimum wage laws, and that's why it's so important that we have coordination between the Department of Labor and the CFPB on these issues.
Thank you. As you both have said, these products are credit, and relevant consumer protections like TILA and the Military Lending Act and state usury caps should apply. I'm glad, as you mentioned in your testimony, that CFPB, under the leadership of Director Chopra, has launched an inquiry on some of these products and is acting like the consumer watchdog that job was created to be. Mr. Seligman, training, the TRAPS, training repayment agreement provisions, raise the troubling prospect of an economy in which employers prey upon their workers' optimism to bind workers to their firms, turning debt into a tool for coercion, limiting economic mobility. You've discussed that. My question is, by saddling workers with debt, limiting their freedom to move or search for a job, do TRAPS limit worker mobility? If you would comment on that.
Absolutely, and in fact, I think that's the purpose on the employer side. We often see that the debt at issue far exceeds the value of the training. So in a recent case, for example, a trucking company sought to collect $6,500 from workers for whom it had paid training costs that didn't exceed $2,500. So it's not an effort to recoup the reasonable cost of training, but very obviously on its face, an effort to trap workers.
So how does limited worker mobility impact individual households? You've said what this means for employers. It obviously means limited mobility for employees. How does that impact individual households? How does that impact the broader economy?
Thank you. The costs of these types of arrangements, which indenture workers, can be devastating. We've spoken to workers who are trapped in abusive employment relationships, to workers who aren't being paid a living wage, who are not being paid what they're owed. That can be incredibly traumatizing for workers. Additionally, there's lots of data from the non-compete context which identify how these types of arrangements suppress wages. We know that they also interfere with the ability of competitors to hire workers that will increase productivity and be paid more and treated better.
Expand on that a little bit more, how it threatens wages and salaries, and then how it undermines future job opportunities. Walk that out a little for us.
Absolutely. One of the most important tools that any worker has in the employment relationship, core to their bargaining power, is the threat of exit, the threat of being able to go and work somewhere else. Employers understand this, right? And in an effort to suppress wages, even as their profits grow, many employers have sought to artificially undermine worker mobility, and as a consequence, that traps workers in jobs in which they're not treated as well as they ought to be, but also which they in a labor market which they don't have the power to earn the wages they're owed.
And you can see how these provisions, these actions, undermine the dignity of work and what that means for workers. And as I said before, I look forward to seeing the results of the CFPB's inquiry and how we move forward towards CFPB's always looking at consumer protections, but also anti-worker practices. Last question, Ms. Gittleman. Earlier this week, Brianna Gordley from Texas testified that the buy now, pay later credit she took out was initially manageable until a variety of BNPL companies approved her for more than $1,500 in credit combined. She was a college student at the time she took out those loans. Does that sort of underwriting meaningfully assess a borrower's ability to repay? For example, do these companies assess whether a consumer has multiple BNPL loans with different providers?
No, most providers do not meaningfully assess a consumer's ability to repay. As it stands right now, there's no way for companies to verify how many loans consumers have across different providers. And for many providers, consumers need only provide a payment form, verify their identity, and do a soft credit check, which again does not meaningfully assess a consumer's ability to repay.
Thank you. And considering that 1/3 of consumers who use BNPL missed one or more payments, and of those consumers, 72% reported a decline in their credit score, it seems that those underwriting standards need strengthening.